Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Swapnil Kulkarni and I am the founding member at Conf42. First of all, I would like to thank Mark and the Conf42 team for providing me with the opportunity to talk about observability in Conf42 SRE 2025. As the name of the topic suggests, whether to observe or not, I don't think that's a question. Everybody is deep down into observability. But the real question is whether it's giving me the output that I'm expecting, whether I'm running the observability systems correctly and looking at the data correctly. So, when we deep dive into the word of observability, we need to look at not what just it is, but how it plays into different contexts across my organization. Whether I'm a developer, SRE, product manager, security, or work in compliance or something else, observability has something for me. But what it is? So, before we deep dive into observability and its different contexts, let's start with the basics. Observability is the ability to understand what's happening inside your system just by looking at the outputs. The outputs in this context are called as signals, like logs, metrics, traces, and events. But more than that, it's about answering the question why something is happening and not just what went wrong into my application, but what do I do about it. So, when we look at observability, it has a very broad spectrum for different contexts into your organization. And let's deep dive into different contexts of observability. So, the first and foremost is about the technical context, which revolves around the core data and tools that send the data. This is the heart of observability. This is where you collect all the telemetry data like metrics, logs, traces, and you define how to use that data, how to track which systems are sending the data, and how the systems that we are observing are behaving. For example, when you look at the technical data, will for an application recently deployed, we'll look at the API latency spikes. You might want to check request duration metrics, you might want to check logs, and you might want to look at specific traces for the service that are failing. So this is the core data and critical for observability. This defines the basics on which the observability system are built on. But beyond this technical context, there are specific use cases. Not all users want to use the depth of all the data that you're sending in, but they want to look at dashboards and alerts. So one of that team is your operational teams, and they have a very defined operational context for your system that is in production. They live and breathe on the data that is sent by these observability tools, and they look at system reliability, incident response, and service level objectives. They want to define different SLAs, SLOs, SLIs, error budgets for their application and track those for the reliability of the system. For instance, let's say you have an operational dashboard that shows spike in 5x6 errors, or define different errors at different service levels. The ops teams want to understand how the system degradation is based on these errors. They not only want to detect these errors, but want to understand their impact on uptime of the system. This directly goes hand in hand with developer experience. The major outcome of an observability system is the feedback loop that operation teams can provide to the development. So the development context has wherein the developers understand how it is from writing and shipping code to running it in production. How different tests are performing for my application, how my CI/CD pipeline is working, and whatnot. Whether I enable a feature flag, how it performs in different stages, and how it affects the different services. This helps users to define the production performance of a certain application, its features, and tune them. It also helps to understand edge cases for different feature flags that have been created. So the development context and DevOps go hand in hand. But that doesn't stop here. A user-facing application is of no use with 100% working backend system and no user experience that works for the customers. So from a business perspective, a 100% backend has no use. So they define different observability requirements for user-facing application, and that is basically goes into the UX context. How the user is experiencing the product, how you monitor how your front end behaves, and how your user flows are working. They use tools like real user monitoring, synthetic checks to help answer different challenges into user experience. Is my login page slow? Is my SSO working? Are my customers abandoning cars because front end timeouts? Does my site load in 5 seconds instead of 2? How is my bounce rate? And different red flags that affects different user flows. The front end monitoring help improve the user interactions with the system. But beyond this typical observability context, the business users are concerned about the user observability and its outcomes. If the technical details that you are getting are not helping business context, then this is a huge drawback into your observability system. The observability system needs to bridge the gap between technical health and the business impact. If you see a drop in purchases for particular product, you need to able to correlate that with an 5xx error in the checkout service or in some other backend service which is not able to work with the database. So if you can determine what is causing the revenue loss because of the application issues, then business can get very good insight into observability data. In addition to the business impact, the business definitely kind of piggybacks on security and compliance for your application health. When you talk about security, the users of the system, the security users of the system needs to ingest the logs and traces that detect anomalies, audit actions, and investigate any breaches into the application in use. For example, a spike in login attempts from a single IP can range or can be spotted into observability data. So it also can help you look at the different tracing for applications for different services within the application and find out user compromise. Right? So these insights are critical and very helpful for modern security monitoring, because a security incident is just not application downtime. It basically costs a business and have different penalties at different regions. So to avoid this, different teams use different compliance methods. Think of GDPR, HIPAA, SOC 2 that you eventually hear about compliances, and they have their own requirements. So the observability system also helps to maintain audit trails, data access logs, and track configuration changes over time that are essential for this compliance and audit requirements. It also helps to define policies like longer retention, then authenticated access to the sensitive data, and creating dashboards and alerts based on that. So, in general, enhancing the observability in different contexts helps user look at the data in different contexts. But what is the use of these contexts? When you want to utilize the observability data, correlation is the key. Application teams might be generating and utilizing infrastructure metrics for sending the software details how it is performing. It is helpful to monitor this performance and resource usage for the applications. But for businesses, the data needs to be domain specific. What is my user experience? Whether it helps me to achieve the business goals. So Correlations of this matrix help the business leaders and the other users to use the observability system. So if you track the latency to number of active users, if you track the 5-day 5 6 errors through block-in signups or checkouts, right? Then this is more helpful to the users than just looking at the different dashboards. The key differences between application metrics and business metrics is that they need to go beyond system performance to define the business performance. They need to go beyond latency, CPU, and error rates to define the convergence, churn, and error research. They need to provide what is affecting the system uptime to what is affecting the revenue and product decisions. So, correlating the application and business metrics is key. Apart from isolating the technical issues, you need to be able to provide the improved customer satisfaction. So, if I'm getting a drop in checkout, I need to be able to find out which is the 500 error that is causing this. And that needs to be defined with different tools that businesses can use. So, if you want to look at different business outcomes, we need to have a visual correlation between the metrics that we're ingesting and based on the labels that we're getting. Having consistent high resolution labels and dimensions will help correlate and give the fine-grained access to the issues that you're getting into application. For example, if I'm able to track which user is getting the bad checkout experiences, which region is having the most latency, which region is having different plans for mobile and let's say browser users, which users are getting feature affected, which product or IDs are getting lower checkouts and whatnot, right? So this is very granular filter that businesses can look at, and essentially this goes into providing alerts for specific things. When we only monitor the infrastructure and application, we give alerts, but when we monitor both business and application, we give composite alerts. For example, if an error rate spike is giving issues into conversion stop, or is giving issues into purchase checkouts, or is giving issues into user signups, this is the alert that businesses want to look at rather than just, okay, I got an 500 or I got 50% error rate into application for last 5 minutes. The SLO for that is should be a mix of system health and user experience. So, going beyond, when we are using an observability system, this needs to have a unified system inside. That's where the correlation helps. That's where you can correlate business metrics to applications. That's where when you look at certain logs for 500, you can look at the time series of it at the same time, see the events which are causing this. If a system does not have a unified view of different data that it is ingesting and provide you with the capability to use that view to better utilize the application business metrics, it is of no use. So, when you talk about observability, application metrics are primarily technical. It talks about things like latency, error rate, CPU usage, database query time, and whatnot. But business metrics are more product driven. Whether I'm able to retain my daily active users, what is the adoption of my new features, what is my revenue per transaction, what is my TCO for total infrastructure that I'm investing in. These are different things that different roles in the system are looking at, and they are critical for everyone. So, business metrics will tell you where the business is based on details that you provide with the application metrics. Correlating the two is very essential, and it turns the observability from a mere backend system into a full stack superpower. Let me give you a very real time example. I am launching a new application with checkout system tied to a standard payment processing. The payment processing works across multiple regions, but I'm getting 5xx and which is affecting my overall SLO. When I look at this, I see that it can be at different places. But if I have a custom label that gives metrics about successful signups or purchases at counters, and with the detailed granularity with user type, region, plan, or feature flags for that thing, I can uh, kind of aggregate based on that and get the details about it. So if a user can get for this region and for this device type, I'm getting my users affected, they can easily change that and deploy canary over there and get the users unaffected. So correlating that is very, but at the same time, the observability system needs to have the capability to correlate that. An observability system with the correlation can give you more uh, output than one which without it. So the at the end of it, the observability system has a defined cycle. It will gather application and business metrics. Based on the tools that you're using, they can be at way different granularity. But when you ingest the metrics, how the observability system is correlating that, create relationships, and visualize the data in a way that any user of the system, based on its role, can define different data sets, define different dashboards and alerts, and generate actionable insights from the ingested data is the key. So, to sum it up, observability has many contexts: technical, operational, user experience, business, security, and compliance. They all are necessary or they might not be necessary for different enterprises. But if you can correlate that to application and business, it brings observability to life. It turns the raw data into real insight, real actionable insight. Thank you for listening in. I'm happy to answer any questions offline or deep dive into specific things. Thank you very much.